Good morning, folks on Zoom as well as folks in person. We got about a minute before class starts, so we'll get going at that point. Yeah, Kaylin took one for you. Yeah. It is due Wednesday. No problem. All right. Hi, everybody, both in person and on Zoom. Of course, I didn't get a chance to double check my videos this morning, and the very first one isn't working, so I'm going to give it 2 seconds to see if I can find it on YouTube, and if not, then we'll just skip that one. There it is. Look at that. It's a minor miracle.
Twins.
All right. Let's do this. This. Delete this. There we go. Yeah, so for anyone who wasn't here in person on Friday, hopefully you swung by to pick up a copy of the exam for yourself. They are in the box on the door of the office next to mine, in Roop. Just warning y'all that if you walk into Roop, it's like a sauna right now. It's awful. I'm like sweating just from being in there. And actually, that's why I didn't get a chance to look over my videos before I came over here, because I was putting in a work order, because there's a knob missing in one of the classrooms that allows you to adjust the heat. So you can't adjust the heat right now. So I was trying to get that taken care of. It's, little tiny things that all add up, right? Okay. So, just to orient us all here, that exam is due in class on Wednesday. If for some reason you're not going to be able to be here Wednesday, please slide it under my door, ideally before class. And we will go from there. Yeah. And then we are just going to keep trucking along. In terms of our schedule, we really don't have that much time left in the semester, which is a little mind-boggling. So if you're following along on your paper syllabus or the PDF of the syllabus, we're to the last page. The last unit is like just on the last page, and there's not very much. So this week we're going to talk about understanding social behavior, or why do they do that. Next week we'll talk about everyday living. And then I will be at a conference that Friday. We do have class the Monday of Thanksgiving week. And then we come back and we have one more chapter to cover, reflections on thinking like a scientist. And then that following Monday, so about a month from now, you'll get exam 4, and then you'll give your presentations that Friday during our scheduled exam time. So everything is kind of coming up. It's going to be a lot sort of downhill from here. Please, if you have questions, concerns, email me, set up a meeting with me. I want to be here to help everybody. And I can't do that if I don't know you're struggling. So we will go ahead and dive into our slideshow in just a minute here. Ready. Oh, and another thing that I should say is that as of last night, all of the lectures should be updated. I had all kinds of tech problems because I tried to do it from here and the Wi-Fi is so slow. And then It only lets me upload X number of videos a day, so they're all up now. All right, so what we're going to be talking about is using psychological science to understand social behavior. And this allows us to start to understand why the people around us do the things they do, right? And why sometimes they frustrate the heck out of us, right? Like, let's be honest. All right, so we're gonna start with this YouTube video. I already have it pulled up over here. Unfortunately, we'll have to watch an ad real quick. Apparently, use Etsy for Christmas. I don't know.
Gifts made by real people. Etsy has it.
If there's one thing that I've learned from studying psychology, it's that people are fascinated by it. All of us want to know a little bit more about why people do the things that they do. We want to be able to explain the behaviors of our friends, our families, partners, and colleagues, and even strangers. In fact, we already try to explain human behavior without even thinking that we're doing so. Have you ever tried to analyze the behavior of the guy that your friend is dating? Or maybe you saw someone running in public and thought, he must be running from the police. Maybe your colleague is acting strange and you think, they're hiding something from me. Humans are meaning-making creatures, and while psychologists attempt to understand and explain behavior, they're also attempting to understand how humans attempt to understand and explain behavior. This process is called attribution, the ways that people explain behavior and the mistakes that they do while making so, because there are plenty of mistakes we make. It might just be as insightful as the actual explanations for the behavior. So I want to talk a little bit about something called attribution theory. So attribution was first brought into the world of psychology in the earliest 20th century by Gestalt psychologist Fritz Heider. Although he did not dive too deep into the process of attribution, he did define two different types of attribution that are still commonly discussed in attribution theory today: dispositional and situational attribution. So, dispositional attribution, or internal attribution, occurs when you believe that a person's behavior is driven by internal factors. For example, a person may cry on the subway because they're emotionally unstable, or maybe because they cry easily. Either way, it's due to that person's internal factors. Secondly, we have situational.
And obviously, there could be a whole host of reasons why you might cry on the subway, right? Just like either you cry easily or you're emotionally unstable. No, it could be, someone close to you just passed away, you just lost your job, right? There could be a whole bunch of things. And I think this is where he's going to get to in the situational
Attribution, also called external attribution, and it occurs when you believe a person's behavior is driven by external factors. Maybe you see the same person crying on the same subway, but you assume that their behavior might be due to an external situation. Maybe they saw something traumatic, or they just got broken up with by the person sitting next to them on the subway. Either process could give you the correct answer, but attribution focuses more on how people come to these conclusions. For example, theories on actor-observer bias suggest that we are more likely to use internal or external attribution depending on whether we are the person performing the behavior or whether we are the person observing it. Next, I want to talk about something called correspondent inference theory. Some attributions theory focus specifically on dispositional attribution. Take, for example, Jones and Davis's correspondent inference theory. Jones and Davis believe that we are more likely to use internal attribution under specific circumstances. If a person acted freely and intentionally, we may be more likely to attribute their actions to their character. We say that it's just the type of person they are. Other factors may lead us to also make internal attributions, and those include if the behavior is particularly unusual, if the behavior is directed at a person, or if the behavior may directly harm or help another person. So let's say you're walking down the street and you hear someone harassing you. It's not a usual behavior and it is directed at you. It checks off two of these off the list. You believe that the street harassment is done to negatively get a reaction out of people. You are more likely to attribute that behavior to the harasser's character rather than some external stimuli that is driving their behavior. In short, this theory helps you understand if we say that a person is doing something because of who they are or because of the situation they're in. Next, I want to talk about Kelly's covariation model. Because attribution theory does not stop with just something called the correspondent inference theory. In 1973, Harold Kelly created a model that is arguably one of the most well-known attribution theories. Kelly's covariation model suggests that there are three factors to determine if we use internal or external attribution. So let's say you're at a dinner party and your friend orders a very expensive champagne during a night out with some of your other friends. Now, you may be wondering, is this because they prefer the finer things in life? Or is it because of external factors in the situation that they are in are motivating them to do so? Kelly has 3 specific factors that you can use to figure out the answer. The first one is consensus. So consensus is how everyone else is behaving in the same situation. You may look at what everyone else is ordering. If everyone in the table is ordering expensive drinks and caviar, then consensus is high. However, if everyone's sticking to cheap appetizers and cheap beer, consensus is low. Secondly, we have distinctiveness. Now this is how your friend behaves in similar situations. Let's say your friend always orders the fanciest item on the menus or buys the most expensive clothes in the mall. If they do, distinctiveness is low, but if they like to save their money, buy from thrift stores, or choose restaurants with cheaper prices, then distinctiveness is high. We're basically saying that your friend buying a very expensive bottle of champagne is distinct. And third, we have consistency, and this is how your friend behaves every time in this situation. Maybe your friend always likes to buy expensive champagne whenever you're out with this particular friend group, or maybe this specific restaurant. And if so, consistency is high. But if this is the first time your friend has chosen to buy really expensive drinks for your friends, we then say consistency is low. And if you find that your friend's behavior is on the low side of the spectrum, on all 3 of these, you're more likely to attribute that behavior to your friend's personality. You say that's just who they are. They're just a flashy guy that values the finer things in life. But if your friend's behavior is on the high side of the spectrum, you're more likely to attribute that to external stimuli. Maybe your friend feels as though they made a bad impression when they first met those friends and they want to make up for it. Or maybe they got a raise. Or maybe even they were hurt by some bad news and they just want to make the evening special. Of course, we can't always use this model with strangers, as with anything in psychology. If a stranger orders very expensive champagne, you can't just look at every single purchase they've made, or exactly who they're with. And in this case, Kelly suggests to look past experiences and attribute necessary and sufficient causes to the person's behavior. People do this all the time. You might just look at a stranger's fancy suit and assume that he's just a high roller. Again, these attributions and what we understand of attribution theory doesn't always reflect the true motives behind a person's behavior. But as I end this video, I want to let you know if we can understand theories of attribution, we may understand how people judge other people, and we may be able to refine the way that we assign causes and make our beliefs and judgments about certain behaviors. So as a review, we went over a little bit about the history of attribution theory. I talked a little bit about the correspondent inference theory and also Kelly's covariation model, which is a lot of big words to basically explain that there are different ways that humans explain other humans' behaviors. I hope you guys learned a little bit about attribution theory in this video, and if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment below or watch some of the other videos in my social site.
Alrighty. I'm just gonna get us set up for our next thing before I go back to the PowerPoint here. There we go. That's what I want. I want to log in. Okay. Here we go. Alrighty. So what that video was talking about, and a lot of what we're going to talk about here is attribution theory. And this is the social psychological study of the way people explain behavior. And it can be the ways people explain behavior. So I have a brief Kahoot activity. Folks in person can do it, but folks who are over Zoom can also do this. So if you're not familiar with Kahoot, what it will do once it loads is show you all a code. Let's just do a classic mode. That's all we need. And then you go to either kahoot.it, or if you have the Kahoot app, then it will take you there. Do this there. So here's your game pin you're going to enter in, and it'll show everybody as you get going. So I see some of our Zoom people are also joining, which is awesome. And this is just going to be thinking about attributions and thinking about how we think about other people's behaviors. All right, I'll give it another minute or two for folks to get logged in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Alrighty, and I find the Kahoot music absolutely annoying, so I'm just gonna turn it off. I don't know if anyone else has that same feeling, but I certainly, like, it drives me batty. Alrighty, so, oh, there we go. Got a couple more folks joining. Awesome. Thank you all for playing along here. Alrighty, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. And I believe it will still show you the pin on other pages if you need it. Alrighty, maybe not. So this is going to be about me. Alrighty, so am I uninhibited, self-controlled, or does it depend on the situation? And I can't see who actually answers which way. So, you know, just throw something in there. And I put in some pictures of me and my family just to kind of like shake it up here. Alrighty, so a lot of people are saying I'm self-controlled. Y'all are pretty accurate. I'm sort of type A, right? So y'all get it. Y'all are budding psychologists. So, and there's no like, I think it's just doing how fast you answer because there's not like a right or a wrong. And choose the term that best describes me. That's me in a giraffe. So quiet, talkative, or depends on the situation. Alrighty, so people say I'm talkative, that makes sense. I have to talk a lot in this class, right? In any class that's lecture-based, but actually anytime I'm teaching. But in truth, it depends on the situation for me. If I'm in a situation where I'm supposed to like schmooze people I don't know, it's like a nightmare for me. Alrighty. All right, choose the term that best describes me again here. Lenient, firm, or depends on the situation. And that is my headshot that I use for professional things. Ooh, really wish they hadn't used a black background with my very dark hair, but you know. Alrighty, so folks think I'm lenient, I would agree, and it does depend on the situation, right? But especially with my like late work policy, I try to be very lenient. Alrighty. So again, thinking about me. Am I subjective, analytic, or it depends on the situation? And this is me presenting at a conference. Alrighty, and a lot of people are saying depends on the situation or analytic. Yeah, I would say, you know, to be a psychological scientist, you do have to be analytic, but I'm also a clinical psychologist by training, so there's a subjective piece of me as well. But honestly, what I'm saying almost doesn't matter because it's really about your perspectives. And I believe this is the last one about me. Am I dignified, casual, or it depends on the situation? And that's us with our kiddo 2 years ago now. Yeah, wow. Time flies, y'all. Alrighty. So folks are saying depends on the situation. Yeah. Alrighty. So now you're going to think about yourself as you answer these. Choose the term that best describes you. Are you intense or calm, or does it depend on the situation? And this, if you all don't remember, was when somebody actually signed on to a Zoom call with a court with this cat filter on. You know, like you do. Alrighty. So next up, again, describing yourself. Are you unassuming or self-asserting? Or does it depend on the situation? Right, a lot of folks are saying depends on the situation. But the next most popular is self-asserting. Alrighty, 3 more here. Are you serious or lighthearted, or does it depend on the situation? Alrighty, a lot of people are saying depends on the situation, and then almost equal for serious and lighthearted. That feels very accurate, right? It really just depends on where you are, who you're with. All right, are you reserved or emotional, or does it depend on the situation? Alrighty, a lot of people are saying reserved, but then about equal emotional depends on the situation. Yeah. Alrighty, now we're gonna be on the last one here. Got some speedy people and people who are answering all the questions. That's awesome. Are you skeptical or trusting, or does it depend on the situation? And yes, this is my cat wearing a wizard cape. Just trying to make it fun. Alrighty. So again, kind of a mix here, which again makes sense because we have a mix of people, right, within our classroom setting. Alrighty. And so again, there wasn't a right or wrong answer, so I think this was just like how many you answered and how fast you were. But it's always fun. Daryl, I like that yours is a brain. That's really cute. I have to like, it used to just be sort of blobs, so I'm glad that they've made it a little more interesting here. Alrighty, excellent job, everybody. Thanks for participating. Again, I know sometimes people get annoyed about Kahoots, right? But I try to just like find ways to mix things up so that they're a little more interesting. Go ahead and put on our captions here. Okay. So, did you find yourself putting depends on the situation more for me or for yourself? For yourself? Yeah. And that's pretty common. Because you know yourself the best, right? You know what you're like in every situation. I mean, you've really only seen me in the classroom, right? Certainly some of you have had me for multiple classes. Some of you have me for multiple classes this semester, but it's still a classroom, right? And also, you just sort of think more like it depends on the situation for yourself, right? Yeah. And so that's part of attribution theory as well. And what can happen when that gets taken to an extreme is the fundamental attribution error. And so the video kind of talked about this a little bit. We can have both dispositional and situational attributions. Dispositional are those internal attributions, where you say, we're going to explain this behavior based on individual internal characteristics. This person's personality, attitude, something about their upbringing, right? The example I always use is clumsiness, right? If I trip on one of these table legs, I'm like, who put that there? Right? But if one of y'all do it, I'm like, oh, maybe they're clumsy. I don't actually do that, but it's certainly good. situational or external attributions are we explain behavior based on aspects of an individual's environment or situation, right? So for that other person, you'd be like, gosh, are they okay? You know, who put that table like there for them? It might lead to more empathy, but people are much more likely to use dispositional attributions for others than for themselves, particularly in Western cultures like the United States. In Eastern and particularly collectivist cultures, where again, your sense of self is more than just you, it's also the people around you, this is not as true. And this distinction disappears when the attribution is negative. I just checked this 2 minutes ago. Hopefully it does actually work. So this is a video about the fundamental attribution error itself. Whoops. Tried to maximize and jump to the end there. There we go. And I believe this is a student-made video for a project, so just know the acting won't be spectacular.
What?
Hey, what's up?
Do you know what just happened?
No, what happened?
Ellie just ran and she bumped into me. She didn't even turn back to say sorry.
Oh my god, what's wrong with her?
I know, right? She's so inconsiderate and rude.
I totally agree.
I'm never gonna talk to her again.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh.
What?
Did I bump into someone just now? Oh, whatever, my class is already started. Hey Lucy, do you want to come to a party? Okay. Hey! Yeah, I did ask her. And she said no again. I know, right? She's so antisocial and she seems pretty lazy. You know, all she does is just lie there. Yeah, I don't think we can ever be friends. Hey, what's up?
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Lynn. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure, of course.
What's up, mean?
Oh, it just means hi or how are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, anytime.
I really like that one because it's so important to know that like stuff that just feels every day in our language is not necessarily translated or taught, you know, within folks who our language is their first language.
Hi, Anna. You don't play cards with us?
I would love to, but I'm going to volunteer.
Oh, okay. Maybe
Another
next time.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks. such a sweet human being.
She really is.
She's so selfless.
So
going to
kind.
volunteer all the time.
Yeah.
She's so great.
So great.
Love her.
Me too.
Finally done volunteering. Okay, let's see. That was 3 hours of community service. Oh, but I still have 7 more to go. Why did I sign up for this program that makes me do community service?
I like that they put a positive one in there at the end, right? It's certainly, we can have like a halo effect where we think someone's really great just because they're going to do something, right? When they might just be doing it because it's a requirement, right? And it doesn't mean you can't like volunteer for a requirement and be a really good person, right? But it does mean that, again, we just never know what's going on inside someone else's head or someone else's life, right? And so trying to reserve judgment, but it's not a judgment on anyone who can't reserve judgment because this is a normal human thing we do. The fundamental attribution error is something we all do. It's common, it's normal. And so if you find yourself doing this, like cut yourself some slack, right? Because it's just our brain's way of trying to process things more efficiently. Alrighty. Sorry. There we go. So the antidote here is that by using psychological science, we might be able to overcome our own biases and to draw more valid conclusions about human behavior, including our own behavior. But as I just mentioned, this is a challenge, right? This is something that's almost like ingrained in us. So the fundamental attribution error in particular is an interesting challenge to clear thinking. Even when research participants knew, for example, that the writers of a controversial political views had received deliberate instructions to take a particular position, they tended to say, yeah, but those people have those beliefs. That's just part of those people. It wasn't the situation. You would have to really believe that in order to write that, right? Whereas, you know, if for an experiment, they tell you to write something, you do it. Despite these findings of early research, studies have shown that we may be more likely to use situational information to judge behavior if the situational information is made salient, and salient just means obvious, right? So if we can make the nature of the situation or context more noticeable, then we may be able to better take into account the causes of those behaviors when we draw our conclusions, particularly about other people. And again, part of the problem, part of why we can't just make this switch is that this requires conscious effort, whereas our brain does the other part unconsciously, uneffortfully, right? We're prone to making attributions about traits quickly and without awareness. It's adaptive for humans because we are social creatures, that we need shortcuts to be able to process things in social situations, right? In extreme cases, they use the example of a criminal confession extorted by strong-arm police tactics. We may, but not always, recognize the role of the situation. Otherwise, we may be blind to environmental effects. As you can see, psychological literacy about the origins of behavior can have practical benefits. Yeah, and thinking about, you know, coerced confessions really makes me think about how many times this happens, how many times innocent people go to jail, particularly people of color, right? And I watched a documentary this summer. I'm not going to remember what it's called, but it was about the fact that in some jurisdictions, if a woman reports a sexual assault or anyone reports a sexual assault, and then they're sort of talked out of it by the authorities, they say, oh, this is a nice upstanding young person, they wouldn't do this, right? And so they say, fine, whatever, it didn't happen. Then the person who reported the sexual assault happening to them can actually be charged with a crime. And say, well, we have a confession of you saying this on tape, which is horrific, right? And then they wonder why people don't report when they're sexually assaulted. Gee, I wonder. So one effective way to go beyond making automatic judgments about the traits and character of others is to try to put ourselves in their place, including envisioning others' circumstances, if only for a brief time. So this is perspective taking, theory of mind, empathy. There's lots of different ways that we can talk about this. So like in some psych classes, people will do exercises like write an essay about the life of an elderly man as if they're him, and that helps with perspective taking. And if we can do that, if we can put ourselves in someone else's position, walk a mile in their shoes, right, then we're better judges of the causes and motives of other people's behavior. Not only do we do better like interpersonally, socially, right, but we're also then going to be better psychological scientists. So one of the things that we see is that in Western cultures, we have what's called a self-serving bias. And this is the tendency to attribute our successes to personal characteristics and our failures to external influences or to other people. So you pass a test, and you're like, yes, because I work so hard and I'm so smart, right? And then you fail it and you're like, oh, it's because I didn't have time to study and Dr. Myers doesn't make her tests fair anyway, and so you attribute it to external things. Now, really interestingly, although they're attributing this to Western culture in general, what we tend to find is that this is specifically people who are more in power within Western culture. So people who are more respected, people who are wealthy, for example, cisgender, heterosexual, things along those lines, white, right? Whereas women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, people who are not as well off economically, are more likely to self-blame. And certainly if you're depressed, this is a huge thing. Everything is sort of your own fault. You blame yourself for everything. But in general, we want to make ourselves look good, especially in these individualistic cultures where that's the thing, right? Where we hold up people's individual accomplishments. Then there are Eastern cultures, and they tend to use more of self-effacement. So this is modesty and personal attributes for success. And they'll attribute the accomplishments to others or to the relationship with others. So, you know, we did this as a team, or this is because I was raised well within my family, things along these lines. All right, so this is from your book, but I think it's a really nice exercise. So it says, one way to think about ourselves in relation to others. For each of the following 6 characteristics, decide where you would place yourself compared to other people. And for folks who are here in person, you cannot read the blurriness. So it's far below average, average, above average, and far above average. So you've got friendly, intelligent, generous, honest, understanding, and compassionate. So rate yourself basically compared to others or compared to the average on each of those traits. You are not going to turn this in. I don't need to know. Just sort of do it for yourself. I'll give you a couple minutes to reflect on it. And folks on Zoom, you can obviously do this yourself as well. You can probably see it better than the folks in the classroom, honestly. Unfortunately, due to this weird old projector. Alrighty. So then kind of pause and think about how you rate yourself. A lot of people will tend to rate themselves as above average on most traits. And if you did that, you have plenty of company. And it's entirely possible that the people in this room and the people on Zoom are above average. And I want to acknowledge that, right? But this is just a human tendency to always think we're above average, right? And to show that it's not just students, I really like this example they gave, where they did this with professors. Most professors have PhDs, were highly educated, right? And they found that in one study, more than 90% of professors rated themselves as above average. Just mathematically, that's impossible, right? If you just think about the normal curve, right? Like 90% of people cannot be above average, right? And if you have to think about what the average is, right? So if you're asking professors to compare themselves to the average of other professors, which I believe is what they're doing, then 90% of them can't be, right? But if you're asking professors to rate themselves on like intelligence compared to the general population, maybe. A lot of professors aren't necessarily highly intelligent. We just work our butts off to get through grad school. Honestly. 2/3 thought they were in the top quarter. Again, mathematically impossible, right? And so we do tend to have high opinions of ourselves. And again, not all these people can be wrong, right? Some of those people are in the top half and some of these people are in the top quarter. But they can't all be. I think that's a nice little activity to show that. So this is a little video talking about that and talking about this self-serving bias.
The self-serving bias describes the tendency of people to attribute success to themselves and failure to outside factors. In other words, if it worked, it's because of me. If it didn't, it's because of someone or something else. It's a common type of cognitive bias that has been studied extensively in social psychology. For example, if a person passes her driving test on the first try, she says that it was because she studied hard and she is a good driver. But if she fails, she blames the examiner, the car, the weather, or anything but her bad driving skills. Studies show that the self-serving bias happens in many different situations of our daily lives, at school, at the workplace, in relationships, sports, and even when we decide what to shop. Researchers think that it helps protect our self-esteem and reduces hurtful emotions we can't control. Self-control, culture, and emotion all play a role, and we even use it to protect others when we say, "It wasn't your fault, there's nothing you could have done." It sounds innocent, but the self-serving bias can have a great impact on our life because we don't learn from our mistakes and that we can do something for years without getting better at it. If the driving student admits that she failed because she didn't practice enough, she could ask people for help, study harder, and pass the test on a second try. After all, you can only influence your own actions and not those of others or your environment. So here are some tips that can help you avoid the pitfalls of self-serving bias. Get started by observing yourself and notice when you're doing it. Then ask yourself, why are you doing it, and does it help you move forward? Try to imagine how your future looks if you use the self-serving bias a lot, and what happens if you accept your failures or look at things that help you succeed.
I do just have to, since we are in a critical thinking type class, I do just have to stop and say that ostriches apparently don't ever do this. It's just like this misconception that someone came up with. It's a nice analogy, right? But apparently ostriches do not bury their heads in the sand, which makes sense evolutionarily, right? Like doing so would make them vulnerable to predators.
Try not to think about the causes of problems too much without moving forward and trying to solve them. When we dwell on the past, our mind looks for excuses, which starts the self-serving bias. Recognize when something is your own fault and learn to forgive yourself. Everybody makes mistakes, but only the people who understand when they did something wrong can learn and grow. This social innovation video was sponsored and created by Minute Videos.
So again, yeah, the idea that these biases seem like they serve us, right? It seems like they're helping us. But in reality, they could actually be getting in the way of us bettering ourselves, right? If we're just always blaming other people. So we may be tempted to think that simply becoming aware of the self-serving bias would be sufficient to get rid of it. That's not true, unfortunately. Just like the fundamental attribution error, right? It has to be effortful, it has to be conscious, right? So how can we overcome it? Although simple awareness does not seem to affect the self-serving bias, a more structured, assertive approach may be effective. And so they're citing a study, and this is the same Kelly that was mentioned in one of the previous videos. They studied students who were not doing well in school, and particularly those who were not doing well and attributing their failure to outside factors, right? So they showed them recorded interviews with actors who reported that starting their college careers with poor grades, that they had blamed on bad teachers, difficult work, parents, roommates, and other uncontrollable factors. But they learned through experience to attribute their performance to controllable influences like study habits, effort, seeking help, and personal motivation. And then these actors said, and then I got much better grades as a result. Students who viewed these video recordings received printed materials describing cases in which successful students reported earning higher grades once they learned to essentially take control of their education through self-control, effort, and self-motivation. However, other cases described unsuccessful students who blamed external sources like bad high school, luck, poor teachers for their failures. So compared to the control group, students in this attribution condition later achieved significantly higher grades. And they said this is because it interrupted the students' previous self-defeating pattern of attributions. And this is something we'll start talking about on Wednesday, but the way that this works is often through cognitive dissonance. When you introduce information that doesn't match with what a person typically believes, it can actually be really powerful. And then we had another study that they mentioned here that found in distant pairs, so people who didn't know each other well, the self-serving bias is very much alive and well. They take personal credit for success and blame the distant partner for failures. But when they had some sort of relationship together, they are friends, classmates, something along those like teammates, right? They took less credit for success and more of the blame for the failure. So it was mitigated by that close relationship. They didn't want to blame their friend for it. And so this tendency for relationships to diminish the self-serving bias even occurs when the relationship is with the computer, which is really interesting, but makes sense given how much computers and technology are a part of our lives now, right? So in short, by asking the right questions and developing psychological literacy, we may be able to reduce this self-serving bias by doing the hard work of learning which aspects of our environment and behavior we can control through effort and motivation, and establishing relationships with those who are engaged with us in difficult tasks. So say you have to do a group project for another class, right? Like building that bond, building that connection. Alrighty, we'll stop there for today, and we'll take up talking about cognitive dissonance on Wednesday. And again, a reminder that your take-home exam is due Wednesday in person in class.